Anybody ever heard of the term celebrity worship syndrome? What is that? Let's take a look at the definition right now. Celebrity worship syndrome, also known as CWS, is an obsessive addictive disorder in which a person becomes overly involved with the details of a celebrity's personal and professional life. And psychologists have indicated that through many people obsessed over film, television, sports, pop stars, the only common factor between them is that they are all figures in the public eye, and it dates back to the 19th century. Now, also, a lot of psychologists say that stalkers often become jealous of their target's girlfriend, spouse, children, parents, pets, as competition for the victim's affection. And what they recommend is not communicating with stalkers, as they will deem it validation and encouragement, so try not to engage with them online or in person. And a perfect example of that is back in the day, man, movie star Rebecca Shafer back in '89. She was killed by her stalker who used to write her letters. And look, she responded one time to him and he thought she liked him. And he killed her, right? At her apartment. That's when they made stalking a crime, that time when she was murdered. That episode will be on this season of The Fan, coming soon. Stay tuned. But anyway, what happens when you tried everything and they continue with the behavior because they might got some mental issues though? So that's when you have to make sure there's proper documentation of their criminal behavior, making it easier to pursue legal action for your own protection. Because see, when a stalker is so far gone, they only hear what they want to hear, no matter how much you tell them no. Now, let's get into the first crazy stalker story. R&B singer Ashanti stalker, right? Now, the story goes for over 13 years, a guy named DeVar Hurd has been stalking Ashanti, and this all started back in 2009 when he first started sending lewd and nasty text messages to Ashanti's mother about her. They say, look, this guy was sending Ashanti's mother, Tina Douglas, lewd messages about Ashanti, including snapshots of his genitals and pictures of their family home. He also told Ashanti's mother how he one day lived with Ashanti and her family, and when they heard that frightened them so much that they had to hire additional security. And once it got to that point, that's when they filed a restraining order. And DeVar Hurd, he was charged and convicted of aggravated harassment and stalking and sentenced to 2 years in prison. And the judge wanted him to receive psychiatric care and confinement, even though they didn't think he had a psychiatric problem for psychological treatment. The doctors classify him as suffering from a delusional disorder. Now, what's the definition of a delusional disorder? It's a type of serious mental illness in which a person cannot tell what's real from what is imagined, and it fits right in the category of schizophrenia. Now, there are all types of delusional disorders like erotomanic, in which I think fits this situation because this type of delusional disorder believes that another person, often someone important or famous, is in love with him or her. The person might attempt to contact the object or the delusion, and stalking behavior is not uncommon. But anyway, back to the story right now. After they put a restraining order on DeVar Hurd and he was sent to jail, Ashanti and her family thought it was over and they wanted to put it all behind them and move on with their life. But in 2013, now out of jail, he was arrested again for violating strict orders from the court to stay away. Look, this time he was sending explicit tweets hundreds of times at Ashanti from 2 accounts. Like, here's one for example of the messages he sent her, right? I mean, he said he wanted Ashanti to wrap her thick thighs and legs around his shoulders and neck and palm his head and put his mouth on her blank. I had to edit that. That's the edited version of that tweet. Plus, he took a picture posing at a party with her little sister, despite orders of protection barring communication with the singer and her family. And at the time, right, Ashanti's sister, she didn't know. She didn't know what he looked like when they took that picture together. So now, when he went to his court trial, this time, he didn't have a lawyer. So he acted as his own attorney. But it ended up being a mistrial after a juror got sick during deliberations. So they had to relive the whole thing again and see his face at another court date. At the next trial date, right, still acting as his own lawyer, this time Ashanti took the stand and told the jury how she felt. She said she felt disgusted, disrespected, and scared by his graphic messages. But after 2 days of deliberation, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision on whether he was guilty of felony stalking. Wow. Now, they did convict him of 9 counts of misdemeanor criminal contempt, stalking, and harassment for sending hundreds of sexual explicit tweets to Ashanti and posing for a picture with her little sister in violation of a restraining order. But not felony stalking, though. So the case resulted in a partial conviction of second-degree stalking, so they would have to go to court again to face each other. Wow, it's crazy. Now, on a third trial, right, he was still defending himself without a lawyer. DeVar Hurd got the chance to cross-examine Ashanti this time. He told the jury that him and Ashanti were a couple, and he said she was jealous and she think he's two-timing her and not being faithful. Wow, it's crazy. Then look, right? Then he starts yelling at Ashanti in court, telling her why didn't she tell him to stop or block him on Twitter if she was feeling uncomfortable. And by her not blocking him, in his mind, right, he thought that she was implying that she didn't mind the tweets. Look, he also told her she shouldn't be mad because she does lap dances in her shows anyway, and she puts out all that sexy content on her social media. What y'all think about that? If you put that kind of stuff out and people comment on it, I don't know. Because see, he claimed sending sexual content is not a criminal act, and that tweeting, even relentlessly, should not be considered stalking. But Ashanti, she fired back though. She responded back saying, "You continuously tweeted over and over again disgusting, derogatory, disrespectful things to me after you had already gone to jail for doing the same thing." And this time, the jury did find him guilty, giving him 4 years in prison. But see, here's the thing though, right? Here's the thing. He already served 32 months in jail for violating the restraining order the first time, and he will get credit for that time served. So they say it's now up to the Department of Corrections to decide how long his prison sentence should be, and if he would have to stay in jail for the remainder of the time, or if any at all. Wow, that's crazy. So he might be out of jail right now. I don't know, but if he is in prison and when he does get out, a new restraining order will prevent him from contacting Ashanti, her sister, and her mother for the next 5 years. Crazy, man. The price of the famous. So y'all want to be famous, huh? Let's get into another story, right? Chris Brown. Look, Chris Brown, man, on May 2nd, 2015, a 21-year-old woman named Amira Ayeb was arrested after breaking into Chris Brown's house. And she lived there for 4 days and she vandalized his property. Now, the story goes, right, Chris Brown, he came home around 7:30 p.m. after a trip from Las Vegas. And when he walked in the house, that's when he saw the stalker, Amira, wearing only some towels in his bed. Wow. He said, look, this girl, Amira Ayeb, hopped his fence, broke the hinges off the doors. Then look, she found time to cook herself several meals in his kitchen. She wrote, "I love you" on all the walls, the countertops, cabinets. She was jealous of his child, so she threw out his daughter's clothes as well as his dog's toys. She sprayed painted her name on his cars. Then she had a bunch of crazy voodoo stuff all around the house. Even she put the voodoo stuff in his daughter's baby crib. That's scary, man. That's crazy and scary. So look, right? Chris Brown, what he did, he took a picture of her in his house sitting on the stairs naked with a towel wrapped around her after he found her naked in his bed. And he posted it on his Instagram. And that's when his fans on Instagram told him, why you ain't got ADT burglar alarm system? Because you got enough money and you can afford it. But I thought he would have had the best security in the world because of how famous he is. But I think he did take their advice, because right after that, he did hire a security company to install a new system to keep himself safe. But anyway, now, the police arrived and arrested her, and she was charged with 1 felony count each of first-degree residential burglary, stalking, and vandalism after stalking Chris Brown. Now, in court, she pleaded not guilty to those charges, and she faced up to 7 years in prison if convicted. And Chris Brown was awarded a 3-year protective order against her, and a judge ordered her to stay at least 100 yards away from him, and she was being held a $220,000 bond. But look, after all that, she only ended up with 2 years of probation. Wow, that's crazy. Now, what's crazy is, months later, another woman named Danielle Patty was arrested for trespassing on his property. Now, look, this girl somehow drove her car onto his property and then refused to leave. And when police arrested her, she told them that Chris Brown was trying to have her arrested because she filed a protective order against him, claiming he had threatened her on social media. That's crazy, because she filed paperwork to obtain a restraining order against Chris Brown. And guess what, y'all? It was granted to her by a judge. Shaking my head, man. Even though he was the victim of her criminal stalking, Chris Brown got a restraining order against him from her. Wow, that's crazy. And how did that happen? See, this is where Chris Brown messed up at. When he started lashing out against her on social media, instead of just letting his lawyer handle the problem, he started going on social media, talking about her and everything. That's when she filed a temporary restraining order against him, claiming he's repeatedly harassed her on social media platforms and said he'd like to see her dead. Now, this girl, she also said her and Chris Brown used to date. Crazy fans, man. But then look, check this, right? That same woman, she did it again months later. And this time, Chris Brown was in the house at the time of the incident. They say it was around 3 a.m. in the morning when they saw her standing outside of his gate, and somehow she managed to find her way onto the property without even being noticed. That's when security was able to detain her, and they called the police, and she was arrested for the second time for the same crime. Wow, man. So how did she get on his property? What she did was she waited by his gate until it opened by another visitor, and then she made her way onto the property. And she was charged with 2 counts of trespassing, and he had to put a restraining order on her after she harassed him for sexual favors. And she ended up being sent to a psychiatric hospital, and the judge ordered her to stay away from him for 5 years, telling her not to go near his home or any of his concerts. Wow. Crazy, man. And look, he also had another stalker. Chris Brown had another stalker years later that tried to jump his fence, but this time he had a dog. So she saw the dog and she changed her mind quick. It's crazy, man. I'm pretty sure, man, he has better security at his house now, because he had a lot of crazy stuff happen at his house, man. Because look, what's crazy is after that first girl I talked about, Amira Ayed, broke into his house, right after that, 3 armed men forced their way into his house and locked his aunt in a closet, but she wasn't hurt though. But they got away with a unknown amount of cash, electronics, and personal items of his. Wow. Price of fame, y'all. The price of the famous. Y'all really want to be famous? Come on, man. Let's get into another crazy story, y'all. Now, this one is crazy, too. Here's another crazy stalker story about 2 men named Mark Stake and his nephew, Tanner Ruin, who were hired by a jail inmate named Dana Martin to castrate and kill pop star singer Justin Bieber. Now, the story goes right now. First of all, let's start with Dana Martin, who planned the whole thing out, right? Now, Dana Martin was already in prison serving 2 consecutive life sentences in a southern New Mexico correctional facility for the raping and strangulation murder of a 15-year-old girl in the state of Vermont. And the story behind that was all because he was jealous that this teenage girl was involved with his teenage boy male lover he was in love with, who stood him up for a meeting that was supposed to take place several days before he killed this girl. It's crazy because Dana Martin knew the girl through mutual friends, and she was a troubled youth with a history of running away from home and using drugs, right? And with her drug addiction problem, he used that, giving her heroin to lure her away from school one day to go back to his house, where he then raped and suffocated this girl. And to make sure she was dead, that's when he strangled her with a necktie out of his father's closet, and then he left her naked body in his family's Jeep while a hose pumped exhaust into the cab of the vehicle. Then he later dumped her lifeless body in a shallow brook. Wow. And that's the story on why he was in prison. But see, this guy Dana Martin was also obsessed with Justin Bieber. This guy was so obsessed with Justin Bieber that he had a guy in prison put a Justin Bieber tattoo on his right leg that took 15 hours to do. Now, this guy, he also tried to contact Justin Bieber with letters after he heard that him and Ellen DeGeneres was close friends. So what he did was he wrote dozens of handwritten letters to Justin Bieber, sending them to Ellen's studio in the hope that she would pass them on to him, but she never responded back, and Justin Bieber never got the letters, so he was mad. Dana Martin said in an interview he wanted to make love and everything to Justin Bieber. Now, he was mad at Justin Bieber, right? He didn't like the fact that Justin Bieber was moving from the pop world and started doing more urban stuff, like hanging out with black people, trying to act gangster and being tough, smoking weed with rappers and so on. But anyway, so Dana Martin became friends with another inmate named Mark State and somehow convinced him that if he carried out the murder for hire plot to kill Justin Bieber and his bodyguard, he had access to large amounts of money that he can give him. He told him that he had a Chinese heroin gang he knew would give Mark $50,000 in cash, a free Ferrari, and a deed to a farm previously owned by Michael J. Fox if he carried out the murder for hire plot on Justin Bieber and a couple other people. Plus, also, he would receive $2,500 per testicle once the deed was done. That's crazy. They were going to cut off his testicles as trophies of their handiwork. Now, Justin Bieber and his bodyguard wasn't the only two people that Dana Martin wanted dead. He also wanted Mark to kill two other people. So, a total of 4 people he wanted dead. It was Justin Bieber, his bodyguard, and 2 other people that was in the state of Vermont. And look, he gave them strict orders to strangle them with a paisley necktie and then castrate them with garden shears. But here's the crazy part, right? After he told them to do all that, he told on them. He told on them. He told a correction officer, look, he ended up telling a correction officer at the prison that 2 men he knew was about to commit a murder in the state of Vermont. Wow. And look, they brainwashed and he persuaded them guys to do it. Mark State, now out of prison, he recruited his nephew, Tanner Ruin, to be down with the murderous plan. So look, the first plan was to head to the state of Vermont to kill the first 2 men that Dana Martin wanted dead. Then after that, they were supposed to head to New York and catch Justin Bieber at his concert in Madison Square Garden. But see, what had happened was when they was on the road, they ended up missing their exit and they ended up going to Canada. And that's when the Border Patrol agents arrested Mark State for an outstanding warrant for violating his probation because he wasn't supposed to leave New Mexico. Now, his nephew was arrested also, but somehow ended up being released and was supposed to still carry out the murder plot. But check this though, right? This is what he did. He ended up talking to his uncle Mark State on a jail phone, telling him he regretted the events and didn't want to continue with the hit without him because it was his deal. Now look, his nephew also talked to Dana White. Like I said earlier, Dana Martin had already told the cops about the whole plan, so all the calls was being monitored and recorded like all jail calls are, and the police heard the whole conversation. And his nephew was later arrested by New York State Police at a gas station. And the police officers, they recovered a pair of pruning shears and information on the intended victims' last known locations. Shaking my head. This is crazy, man. Now, in court, right, the judge sentenced Mark State to 9 years for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and another 9 years to be served concurrently for a second count of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Now, his nephew, Tanner Ruin, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and received a deferred sentence of 5 years, but after serving about 1.5 years, he was placed on supervised probation. But then 1 year later, he was arrested again and sent back to prison after police officers say he threw a bag of meth out of his car during a traffic stop. They also found heroin as well. Now, after all that, Mark State did a jail interview saying the murder for hire story wasn't true. He claims he went to the state of Vermont to pick up a Ferrari that he had the title to by Dana Martin, and said he had no knowledge of the plan. He said Dana Martin made the whole story up in a desire to become infamous. He said the story was fake, and when he heard the story, he couldn't stop laughing for 45 minutes because it's impossible, and he would have a better chance of going to kidnapping Osama bin Laden and killing him than getting anywhere even remotely close to Justin Bieber. But New Mexico prison officials released audio recordings of phone calls between Mark Stake's nephew, Tanner Ruin, and Dana Martin discussing Justin Bieber and talking about Mark Stake's arrest at the Canadian border. So they had it all on tape through the phone calls. And as far as Dana Martin, who masterminded the whole thing and was already serving consecutive life sentences, he pleaded guilty to criminal solicitation to commit first-degree murder and criminal solicitation to commit first-degree felony murder. They just added 9 more years, followed by 2 years of probation. Crazy, man. Stalkers, man. This is crazy, man. And there's a lot more stories like this, y'all. So many celebrities have faced crazy stalker fans, man. And look, here's another crazy stalking encounter involving American Idol and America's Got Talent judge Simon Cowell. Right now, the story goes, he was watching TV in his bedroom when all of a sudden he heard a loud bang coming from his bathroom.